So we had three breakout questions on the table. The first of which, were you able to identify self-determination and self-sufficiency within the material that we watched? The second, how would you situate terrorism within the material? And then finally, what stood out to you? So who would like to discuss how they talked about self-determination and self-efficiency within the text or within the material, excuse me.
In the material during the Tulsa, it's pretty much like an example of pretty much self-sufficiency, right? So like the during the time the Jim Crow laws were still in place and everything like that. So the black people needed there was a supply and there was a need for more businesses that allowed black people to go inside. And then the black people were just like, you know what? How come we can't do this? Like, right? Let's like let the self-sufficiency was let's start our own businesses for our own people, right? Because like the white people don't like us, and might as well like we could do this. And they did. It's pretty much the entire town of Tulsa showed the self-sufficiency of the black people.
Thank you, Anthony. Good call out. Anyone else want to speak to the self-sufficiency or the self-determination that was exhibited within the material? If not, we could talk about the role of terrorism within the material. How were you able to situate notions of terrorism?
In one of the videos, it was talking about how there were planes that were like dropping either like bombs or it was like some type of gas. I don't think they were quite sure, but they're dropping something, and that was like the first time that it was like turned on our own people, and so that's an example of terrorism during the race riot.
So the first case of domestic bombings were in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Perfect. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can add that the bombing on them was unprecedented. They never done that before in their land there like that. And so it was deaf to the black people. They saw that in their mind that they was really out to kill them. And prior to that and during that time, I think the they had a I don't know, a civil structure of hanging blacks, which also was very terrorizing. And for any black person, didn't matter if you're male or female, and hanging. So I believe that they lived in fear 24/7. And that day, it showed the ugly head of death to them.
Perfect. Thank you, Don. Anyone else want to speak to the terrorism, or do you want to talk about what stood out to you in the material? Go ahead, Jay.
I was just gonna say that I think that it's like, or what stood out to me the most is the fact that it seemed like it was very prosperous, like before everything, like the bombings and everything like that. It seemed like it was at a point that it was like more intelligent, more knowledgeable, and more like advanced than anywhere really else around it. So I just thought that was like interesting.
Anyone else?
Kind of to go based off of what Jay said, I found it interesting how like I'd never heard of them having like their own government and like how they were so like high up like a long time ago. Like I never knew that. So I found that interesting because I've never like seen that before.
Thank you. Um, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Don. Were you gonna say something, Donald?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I believe the community of blackness, they piggyback off of the articles or the method of the newspaper of Garvey and to go back to Africa and have, all their things they could do. Instead, when that didn't happen, they decided to do it there in that country, in that state. And so it's the the media or the leaders or black leaders at that time, regular people understood and listened. And so when they decided to start their community and have churches and business and barbershops and everything else and hospitals and these were the things that all whites had. And so it showed that they were intelligent enough to do this and had the mindset to doing it. Yet many of the whites did not agree with that. But when they showed them that they could be successful, um, half of them didn't like it and they became violent against that.
Perfect. Thank you, Don. And also, I think that provides a perfect trend. Actually, before I go there, anyone have any thoughts or comments on the MOVE movement material? Because I think, yes, while you're talking about Black Wall Street and the affluence that they were able to amass and the financial wealth that they were able to amass, which I believe it was Don's point, it made the powers that be jealous, right? It was more sophisticated and more economically powerful than a lot of their surrounding areas, which caused the wrath, right? But if you look at the MOVE movement, it's a stark contrast, right? They didn't amass a great amount of wealth. In fact, their ideas were about like disavowing capitalism, right? But they met the same fate. So any ideas or thoughts about the MOVE movement or with how they sought to practice their self-determination and self-sufficiency? All right. So piggybacking off of where Don left us at, right? He says that, there was this Garvey movement that was concerned with repatriation, with going back to Africa and building up Africa and making Africa a nation for Black folks everywhere globally, right? And he says, well, if we could not make that move back to Africa, we'll do the same things, we'll apply those same principles to where we're at, right? And remember, if we talk about last week, one of the main contentions or one of the main pillars of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, it was to establish self-determination. Now, I want you all to take this temporal context in concern, right? And again, when you talk about temporal, that simply means time. The Marcus Garvey movement takes place in the early to mid 1920s, right? Reaching the height of the movement in 1920. Black Wall Street happens in 1921, right? The very next year. So all of these things are really happening at one time, right? Think about how Marcus Garvey the year prior was able to produce and cultivate the largest movement of Black people on the United States soil ever, right? And I told you how they were able to amass wealth within the community by people pitching in their funds, right? So to Don's point, what you see in Black Wall Street is a magnification of that, right? And yes, it's also true, and this is to Anthony's point, right? Because of segregation, because of Jim Crow and Black codes, we were forced to have our own businesses and shops. We could not go to their grocery stores to get food. We cannot go to their hospitals to get health care. We cannot go to their banks to get financial support, right? So with that being the case, we were forced to do it ourselves. And we did it in a way that oftentimes we're more superior than the competition, to call it what it is. Don points us out to the act of lynching as a form of terror. Bless you, bless you. Don points us to lynching as a force of terror. Now, if you were to think about this notion of lynching from how the story is told, Oftentimes, lynching is associated with someone trying to look at, make an advance towards white women, or the claim that this happened. Oftentimes, it was a false claim or a false cry that was made by a white woman saying that this black man tried to do so and so and so. But that's not really why lynchings took place. The predominant reasons why lynching took place back in those times were due to black folks showing economic support and stability, having businesses that competed with their white counterparts. In fact, the work of Ida B. Wells is centered around the anti-lynching movement. She got into this work because of her good friend who owned a grocery store across the street from a white man who owned a grocery store was lynched because his grocery store started to do better, right? So while we are attentive to this notion of lynching, let's place it in the proper context and understand that 9 times out of 10, these lynchings were economically motivated, right? I don't want to have to deal with the competition of this business, so we'll get rid of the business owner by lynching him. So what you see within Black Wall Street is, again, the magnification of that. We won't just lynch one individual, right? We'll burn down the whole town. Now, let me ask you, based on the material that we watched, what was the cause for the race riots in Black Wall Street? What did they say happened?
I believe it was because some I forgot his name, let me get it. But some person the person got locked up, and then the black people of Tulsa went to the prison because there was a bunch of white people outside as well. And then a pretty sure white person called one out. He's like, "Oh, what are you gonna do with that gun?" And then the black person was just like, "Oh, like if I have to, I would fire it." And then the white person escalated the situation. It's like, "Oh, you're not gonna like pretty much saying you're not gonna do it." And then from there, it escalated into like just a bunch of jealousy from the city.
Okay. Who remembers the incident on the elevator? You might recall that from the
It
material. Go ahead, Kate.
it was a I don't remember his name either, but I know he was it was a 19-year-old boy going up the elevator, I think said to use the restroom, and he stumbled or he bumped into the operator, the lady working it. I think her name was Sarah, and she screamed, and then I guess that was the claim make from that.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. So again, think back to what I told you, right? They will often frame these things within the reality or the false reality that white women are being assaulted, right? So it wasn't really about what happened on the elevator, right? Because even as time goes on, the women who got bumped would go on to say that, it wasn't really what it was made out to be, right? But what it was really about was knocking down the economic power base of these people who should be inferior to us. We can't have people who are classified as inhuman making more money than we do. It doesn't make sense that these people who cannot obtain wealth have access to private jets. It doesn't make sense that these people who cannot obtain wealth are looking to make exchanges economically with other countries. So for this to be true and this system that we built up to be true, we have to what? Get rid of them. So hence the bombing. And as you all pointed out, right, the first act of a domestic bombing, the first time the United States has dropped bombs on United States soil, or another way to think about this, the first time the United States has bombed its own citizens. That's deep. So when you think about terrorism, right, this is why I asked the question number 2. When you think about terrorism, what is more terroristic than that? How is that different from what's going on in Gaza right now, where the Palestinians are just getting randomly bombed by the Israelis? What's the difference? I would claim, or I would argue, that those are both equal forms of terror. But what they do, they complicate it by using terms like force, right? So that way their violence is justified. So the first domestic bombing was Tulsa, Oklahoma. I know y'all don't know this because you're too young to know this, but Don might know this. There was a group called the Gap Band, and they were from Tulsa, Oklahoma. My family, on my mother's side, is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Gap Band stands for Green Tree, Archer, and Pine. These are the main cross streets that made up Black Wall Street. Now, one of the most famous songs by the Gap Band is "You Dropped the Bomb on Me." And if you listen to
Yeah.
the song closely, in the background of the song, you hear a bomb falling. And what they're talking about is the bombing of Black Wall Street, their home. The first known domestic bombing in the United States. The second happens what? About 60 years later in South Philly. The MOVE movement, as they decide to go off the grid, if you will, right? As they decided to detach themselves from the crippling confines of capitalism. They were seen as pariahs in their community because they chose to wear their hair naturally. They chose not to buy into consumerism and wear the latest fashions. Anthony, go ahead.
Hearing this now, it's honestly eye-opening as someone who has listened to the Gap Band for years and not knowing the story behind their songs. This really did change my perspective, and I'm just hearing everything, and it's like, damn, we have an evil government, and learning more about it, it's disheartening, extremely disheartening.
Yeah, to say the least, we have an evil government, right? Like that's to put it politely.
Yeah, extremely politely.
Yeah, I would say more like these motherfuckers are maniacal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Um, so again, just because well, I can't say that. One of the factors that led to the destruction of the MOVE movement is they chose to present themselves differently, right? They didn't want to look like how the establishment said they wanted to look like, right? What if you know the histories of what's called locks, right? And some of you all may call dreadlocks. The history and the reason why they were worn was to show that you are anti-establishment. So this is the history and the origin of this hairstyle. It can be traced back to the Mau Mau movement. Well, it can be traced back longer than this, but the notion of it being an anti-establishment movement, it stems from the Mau Mau movements of the 1950s, right? The Mau Mau were a guerrilla faction of fighters to overthrow the colonial powers in Kenya. And they would wear their hair in locked styles to again show them that we're not going to go along with your plans. We're going to go back to our native presentation of ourselves. And then this idea gets picked up by the Jamaicans, and they produce in this religious practice or the spiritual practice called Rastafari, right? Then it gets kind of popularized through there. But the MOVE movement picks up this hairstyle as well. They pick up this notion of being anti-establishment, right? We'll grow our own food. We'll practice what's called an ITAL diet, which also stems from Rastafari, right? If you ain't going to the government for your food, if you ain't going to the government for your safety, you're not putting our children in your schools, right? Again, this is how they get viewed as a pariah. And then also, if you watch the material, to see how racist South Philly was at the time, and the mayor of South Philly and his practices and his ties with the mob, right? All of these things produced a groundswell that caused the MOVE movement to be the second domestic bombing in the United States. And as the material demonstrates, right, some of these individuals, the ones who survived the bombing, right, they're just now being released from prison, right? This happened in the late 1980s. I was born in 83, I'm 40 now, right? So they spent some 30 odd years in prison. And again, they were the ones who were bombed. And to Anthony's point about how evil this government is, they charged them with the fires that burnt down the city. So think about this. Hear me. I want to make sure you understand me clearly, right? The police of Philadelphia go in and drop bombs on these row houses. So if you know what row houses are, that everything is connected. So you can't just bomb one row house or one apartment and not expect the whole block to burn. And this is what happens. It's 11 block destruction that takes place. The police drop the bomb, but when the survivors are captured, they charge them with arson. This is what we're dealing with. So what I want you also to be able to understand, the threat of self-determination, the threat of self-sufficiency is viewed as a threat no matter if you amass wealth or if you're not concerned with amassing wealth. We have two polar opposite positions by two organizations, right? Or two groups of people, we'll say, right? One, based off their self-sufficiency, establish an obscene amount of wealth. The other, because of their way they view self-sufficiency, eschewed all forms of materialism. But they met the same fate. What that makes me think about is the distinctions that they try to draw between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Malcolm, hyper-violent, right? By any means necessary. Malcolm, Martin, non-violent, turn the other cheek. So two polar different ways of going about something. How they both die? The bullet. So what you should begin to understand that this government, the powers that be, however you want to classify it, what they view as a threat is Black folks trying to do for themselves. No matter how they try to do for themselves, be it violently, supposedly, or non-violently, whether it be through means of economic uplift or eschewing capitalism and materialism, they're always met with a violent, terroristic, repressive force, no matter, irregardless. So who really understands the notion of any means necessary? Who really, really, really understands this notion of any means necessary? To Anthony's point, y'all government. Because they'll go through any means needed to ensure that we don't have self-determination and we aren't able to do for ourselves. I asked you all about we talked about COINTELPRO, right? Did we talk about that? J. Edgar Hoover and how he destroyed the Garvey movement, how he destroyed Malcolm X, how he destroyed Martin Luther King, how he destroyed the Black Panther Party. So one of the premier lines in the COINTELPRO files was to stop the rise of a Black Messiah. One more time. To stop the rise of a Black Messiah. Somebody tell me what a Messiah is. And give me an example of a Messiah. What's a Messiah? Nobody? Go ahead, Andrew.
Like a savior or yeah.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. It's a savior. In fact, Marcus Garvey's nickname was Messiah. That was his nickname, the Messiah. So think about it. We want to stop the rise of a Black savior. Couldn't Martin Luther King be viewed as someone who could save the Black nation? He gone. Couldn't Malcolm X be viewed as someone who could save the Black nation? He gone. We'll go even a little bit more contemporary, the 90s. Tupac Amaru Shakur, son of Black Panther lineage. Couldn't he be looked at as someone who could save the Black nation? Yep. Ermias Armageddon. Ermias Ashkodon, or who y'all may know as Nipsey Hussle. Couldn't he be looked at as someone who could save or was attempting to try to save and improve and empower the Black nation? Isn't it ironic that they all meet the same fate? Stop the rise of the Black Messiah. So I'll end it there. In fact, I'm sorry, before I end there, There's a movie called The Black Messiah. Judas in the Black Messiah is actually called. I will offer that as extra credit because that gives you a very clear depiction of how COINTELPRO works. Excuse me. It's called Judas in the Black Messiah. It's starring Daniel Kaluuya playing Fred Hampton, and then Lakeith Stanfield is playing the snitch. So if you watch that, do a journal entry for that film, and you'll get extra credit. We'll transition into our fishbowl. If you have not fishbowl this semester yet, I suggest you do so. 2 per semester. You have 1 time to pass. Next week, I believe next week is is it spring break next week, right? Or is that different school? Some of y'all saying yes, some of y'all saying no. Let me see something real quick.
Isn't spring break
on
week
the
10?
first.
It's on the first? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just check my modules. So we'll have 1 more week of material then, or 2 more weeks of material. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in wrong school. 1 second, y'all. So I'm a little early. Okay. No worries. We'll have I'm gonna move up some material for Wednesday. So what we'll do on Wednesday is we'll read the Malcolm X reading, excuse me. So you'll have an opportunity to fishbowl for that also. But for today, 2 times to go for the semester, 1 time to pass. You could talk about the lecture, you could talk about the breakout groups, or you could read from your journal or mention just anything you found of interest about the material. Are there any volunteers for fishbowl?
I'll go.
Jasmine. I heard someone else. I'm sorry. What was your name?
Me, Grecia.
Teresa. Okay, thank you. We'll have 1 more. Anyone else? Okay, Jocelyn, thank you. All right, so we'll go with Jasmine, Gracia, and Jocelyn. Jasmine, you can start us off.
Okay. I wanted to point out how in the first video, the white leaders said they were ashamed of the race riot and they had made pledges to rebuild Greenwood, but they did the complete opposite because they tried to steal the land of Greenwood and industrialize it, and they also created new policies that would make it impossible for Black Americans to afford to rebuild it. And then I think the points made in this video argues around the notion that white Americans never wanted to see the success of Black Americans, and they often saw prosperous Black people and their communities as a threat, which creates a tension between white and Black Americans till this day.
Call out, Jasmine. Thank you. Gracia?
Yeah, I just like made a connection about like it was on the first video how after they after like Greenwood was like destroyed and they were like moved to like tent cities, how they were giving like green passes, and it kind of like reminded me of what happened in like South Africa like in the late 80s with like apartheid, and like they were giving like I think it was a pass law where they were giving like only like where they were like have like restrictions to like pass to like the white neighborhood. Yeah, it's my connection.
Good connection. Jocelyn?
Okay, well, I wanted to talk about something about you said how blacks were basically forced to do their own things because they weren't allowed to do anything with the whites. Um I like what I think Jasmine said, how towards the end they said that they were trying to rebuild Greenwood and they weren't allowed to. They were actually they actually didn't let them do it. I also want something I found interesting was like in the beginning, like I didn't know anything about how like well blacks had their own community and stuff like that. I didn't know that like they had their own even like millionaires, and also how they had even better wages than the whites. Um and I think I don't know, I think it was just kind of like interesting how they literally had it way better than the whites, and that's why the whites kind of like were jealous of it and had to do that in order to, yeah.
Good call out. I want to do a couple things. One, take Jocelyn's comments and tie that to a greater historical text. And then we'll get to you, Anthony. One, think about what she just said, right? In the sense that because of segregation, they were forced to build up these things, and they ended up being better than what their competitors, if you will, had, right? Think about the destruction of Black civilization, right? Think about how folks came from Europe, viewed Africa and seen the magnificence of Africa, right? And because of that jealousy, because of that haterism in them, right? Then they began the process of destruction. So this is an age-old thing, right? This is a consistent thread that goes back to when the first European set his foot on Africa, right? But then I'm also thinking about Jasmine and how she talks about, right? We're gonna get them their land back, but then they, build up these housing that aren't affordable to the original landowners, right? Is that not what gentrification is? That's exactly how these things play out, right? So again, even back then, the 1920s, it's the same tactics. But what they do in more modern times, they won't drop bombs, right? They'll build stadiums, hence Inglewood, right? They'll build freeways, hence Sugar Hill in the mid-city part of Los Angeles, right? In the early 1940s, right? Stadiums, Dodger Stadium, right? Chavez Ravine was once a thriving indigenous community before they removed all of them to build the stadium. So these are all continuations of tactics that are employed to further advance this notion of capitalism, right? Also, I think the connection between apartheid and what was happening is also a very, very good connection. When you think about and I'm talking about this in terms of gentrification, right? But you could also make connections between gentrification and colonialism, right? Because isn't the process of colonialism removing the native people off the land and making sure that the resources of that land go to the foreign occupiers? Same thing. Where's the difference, right? But I think what's sad, and with the powers that be fail to realize, even with all of the resources that they have at their feet, right? They still weren't able to build up a thriving neighborhood like Black Wall Street. They couldn't replicate what they destroyed. Does that make sense to you? So they're mad at the wealth that they were able to establish. So they destroyed their means of accumulating that wealth, but they themselves could not go through the process of establishing that same wealth. They're mad at the brilliance of Africa, but they themselves cannot duplicate what Africa was. It has been argued, like Stonehenge, y'all know that like monument Stonehenge? It's been argued that that's the Europeans' attempt to copy the pyramids. If that's true, that's a piss poor attempt. They got like 8 stones at that motherfucker to try to build a pyramid? Like, oh, you gotta do better than that, right? If this is true. Something to be said there. This is why, for me, the idea of calling this system, this is a system, be clear. This is a system at play, right? It's not individual actors. This is why it's problematic for me to call this system white supremacy. You gotta go through all of this. If you gotta go through all of this, you're not supreme. Think about it. If you have to cut everyone down to authorize and support and affirm your authority and your supremacy, is that a supremacy? Anthony, you had your hand up?
Oh yeah, and I wanted to talk about how it's like this kind of treatment still sort of continues in modern day, not only through what's been listed, but also through them trying to cover up and rewrite Black history. They don't want people nowadays to be informed of the atrocities that were committed and continue to happen. And by doing that, not only are they making excuses and saying horrible things like, like slavery maybe was a choice or it wasn't as bad as it's presented. But they're also continuing to silence those that speak up about it and try to educate others. So yeah, I mean, like this government is fucking horrible. Like it's as you said, it's maniacal, everything that they do. And it still continues this black hatred that is so deeply ingrained in the United States is unfortunately still continuing.
Good call out. I'm thinking about this terrorism thing, and I'm thinking about it for two reasons, right? One, I just came from San Jose, which means I hopped on a flight, right? Um, there and back, I got the pat down search, and this is supposed to happen randomly, right? I'm like, okay, if it's random, it's very unlikely, right, that I would be randomly selected twice. But y'all know what I do for a living, so I know better than that, right? And this is what they mean by random. I have the random skin color, right? And then I thought about it a little bit more. Thought about it a little bit more. And then what clicked on me and what dawned on me even more, not only is my skin, but my name. Why would you think that my name would be significant? Because Amiri has Arabic influence. So 2 strikes. So hell yeah, motherfucker, we pulling you out of this line and you getting patted down. But let's think back to the why. You have to go back to the why. Y'all might not even have been born for this, but I remember the why. I graduated high school in 2002. The summer, yeah, Kate, 2002. Yes. Your camera on, not just playing with you. The September before I graduated, can anybody tell me what significant happened? The September before my graduation. Think New York.
Bombing, the 9/11.
Yeah.
9/11. So what I'm saying to you is I remember a time where you could go to the airport and like watch your family get on the plane and it's cool. Like all these checkpoints and pat downs and all that shit, that wasn't going on. 9/11 was a proxy to extract our privacy. I got you, Anthony. All the government surveillance that's taking place under what's called the Patriot Act happens because of 9/11, right? This is all done to prevent the United States from experiencing terrorism, okay? Y'all with me? But I just showed you historically the first terroristic act in this country. But you see how masterfully they can manipulate a story to make you think that the terrorist comes from the Middle East. So we're subjecting ourselves to x-rays, to having your body be violated, right? To prevent some type of faux terrorist. When the terrorist is the actually one who so-called or calls themselves doing the protecting of us. You see the irony in this? And this is why history is so vastly important. And to Anthony's point, this is why they're beginning to change how we tell history. Go ahead, Anthony.
To further add on to that, the Patriot Act was often used to spy and kind of the word's not coming to my head, but like invade minorities, like personal space. The word's not coming to my head, but yeah, it was often used to spy and do all those things so that they could not only search them at airports, but also go out of their way to even at times use it as an excuse to even potentially hate crime those people. I have a Middle Eastern friend, God, bless her soul. Her name is Salma, and she was attacked at an airport because she wears a hijab. Like it's the not only the 9/11 and the Patriot Act and everything else add on to Islamophobia and racism generally in the country, but this hate still continues to this day, and people tend to shun and kind of point the finger at people of color and people that I guess in air quotes seem out of the ordinary. that. And it all stems once again from politicians, the government, and how they're attempting to silence and change history, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's fear mongering, right? Like they're gonna sell you fear so then they could sell you safety. The only reason that you'll feel comfortable giving up your rights and your civil liberties is because you think you're being protected. Shortly after 9/11 and the Patriot Act, what did they start introducing to us? Social media. Go look up and run and understand who has great amount of access to our social media. When I tell you about this COINTELPRO thing, what they did is they evolved COINTELPRO into the Patriot Act. And then that went on steroids by the way that we use Facebook, Instagram. What's the other one that's tied to Instagram? TikTok. All those are highly government surveilled. In fact, we're trained so well that we will do a crime and post that shit on live. That's how well we've been trained to engage these devices. So now we didn't have to worry about the spy. You carry the spy in your pocket. Talk back to me. You got 10 more minutes. What are you thinking? Anthony Enriquez, real quick. I'm sorry, I got you, Anthony, but I want to hear from Anthony Enriquez before we hear from you, sir.
Just about like in general stuff.
What everything, anything that you heard today?
I just kind of want to make a point about. I think it's interesting how, like in the video, they talk about how many African Americans, they kind of built their whole community and they were thriving, and then you have that idea that many whites are like trying to downplay what they do, and then they see how successful they are, and then they're like all of a sudden now they want to kind of like take over despite them kind of, giving them so much like bad reputation and saying all these things. It's almost like a jealousy that came up with them. I thought that was interesting kind of looking at that because, like I said, like they're hating on these people so much, yet once they see them thriving, that's when they want to all of a sudden like come over, because they wanted them separate at first. And then they're like, oh, wow, now that they're doing good, nah, that's like, we have a problem with that. So they came to like their like territory, and then that's when they were like causing problems. So I just think it's so like hypocritical and ironic that they do that type of stuff. It's kind of like preying on their downfall almost.
Well, I would
That's
say
kind of my
causing
thoughts
the
on it.
downfall, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of like my whole idea.
Cool. Thank you. Anthony, go ahead.
Another thing, I guess, most popular character in this conversation, the government. Man, fuck them. It Another thing that's been going on recently is so what is it? There was a big meeting, and I forget what it was. Like the words aren't coming to my head because right now I'm on the spotlight. But basically discussing bills and laws be passed, stuff like raising the federal minimum wage. Nobody was able to come to a consensus on that. Stuff like abortion laws, nobody was able to come to a consensus on that. But banning platforms that maybe allow more freedom of speech, which lately has been TikTok, which more or less, because I guess in regards to what's happening in Palestine, the genocide, a lot of information about what's going on in Palestine right now is being shared on TikTok, and the government isn't really liking that because of the message they're trying to spread that Israel's the victim when in reality they absolutely are not. And everyone was able to come to a consensus on banning TikTok because Chinese government wants to spy on us, yada yada, and spreading misinformation about stuff that's going on. And it's just when you kind of think about it, that idea just dawns on you that the government isn't at all for the people, not in the slightest. And it's just kind of once again disheartening finally learning about all of these things, especially as someone who was never really well educated on any of these topics that we've been discussing. And it's just saddening. Quite honestly, it's sickening.
Anyone else? General thoughts, comments, concerns. How you feeling? We talk about that too.
I kind of wanted to bring up when I was watching the video how, and like you said today, that a lot of the lynching or crimes that were trying to be, I guess, put onto Black people, a lot of them had to do with like assaults against white women or like the claim that there was an assault. And I think it's really ironic that I'm positive almost that those white men back then were absolutely assaulting white women, all women, young and old. And yet when they see it in an instance that it can be for their gain, they're like, oh, calling it out when they're going home and doing the same thing. It's very ironic.
I'll fuck you up even more, Kate. Oftentimes they would assault their own wives and then blame it on someone Black, right? But here's an interesting way of thinking about this whole assault thing and the implication of the race dynamic, right? Anybody see LeBron over the weekend hanging out with Jeannie Buss? Nobody seen that? No. So Anthony knows what I'm talking about. Enriquez. So we all know who LeBron is, right? Plays for the Lakers. The owner of the Lakers is the Buss family, currently ran by Jeannie Buss, right? LeBron's courtside with Jeannie Buss, and I don't know who the other woman was, but they could not keep they white hands off of his Black ass. Couldn't help themselves, like fawning over this married man, mind you, right? And it prompted an interesting conversation with me and my wife. She's like, man, what should he have done? Because she like, Savannah gonna be mad as fuck. Which I'm sure she is, right? But here's LeBron's quandary, right? Because we all know what he wants to do. He wants to own a basketball team. Furthermore, that's his boss, right? That's his boss. Let's understand what's going on. She's the owner of the team. He's the major player on the team. So that's his boss. To me, he looked uncomfortable and it did not look like he warranted that touch. But because of her position of power, he couldn't, I mean, he could, but it may sully that relationship, right? So it got me thinking like, well, shit, where's LeBron's Me Too moment? Because he was very much sexually assaulted. In any other circumstance, in any other work environment, if the roles had been reversed, that's a lawsuit. Or that individual is losing their job. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say like two things that on before with the government thing that like it's very corrupt. Like, I think that's one of the biggest serious things too. And sometimes I feel like people don't like dive too much into it because they feel like there's like not much that they can do, I guess. But I feel like if there was like, I know that sometimes this is unrealistic, but if there was a unison between like, everyone and against the government, I don't know. I wonder if there would be like a chance almost. I don't know. It's hard to like really talk about the government, especially when like they're already very corrupt and there might be like, tens of thousands of secrets that of their more corruption that we don't even know about. And I wanted to relate on one of the things too, um, especially with like with Palestine and everything like that, and how because I remember seeing this too, like when it first started happening. I remember it was around like I think October, November. That's when stuff started like in the news to pop up and stuff like that. Um, yeah, no, this has been happening for like a while, at least like not centuries, like a few years though, like many years. I think centuries. I don't really know, but I remember, and there was an ad, and it was for it was like one of the first times when it popped on the news. It was an ad for Israel, and they were saying like send help to Israel and like make sure like you send aid and donate money and stuff like that. And I just thought that was crazy. Like um, and still, I'll be watching YouTube. I'll still see like some small ads for them, but never for Palestine and stuff like that when they really need it. Um, Another thing too, real quick. I remember, so back in August, there was, I don't know if you heard, but of Maui, like when it set on fire, everything like that, and like the Maui fire, like the Maui fire. I was there when that happened, and I still think that stuff was crazy too, because a lot of people are saying, because I remember when it happened, it was like 12 o'clock, like 1 o'clock, and the power went out. And so because the winds were so strong that the power like blew, I guess pushed down the electric like stuff like that, and then it ended up catching fire overnight. But a lot of people speculate like that's kind of like that's bull because you're telling me that no one got alerted, no fire department, it everything just started catching on fire and no one said anything because it was in Lahaina. I was around like 9 minutes away from Lahaina, and there's people that are there. There's like homes. I've seen it. There's people that are there. Everyone goes there. It's like a center town area, but still no one, nothing was alerted. And then straight after that, um, I think they said like 900, like for families, only $900 gets sent to them. And like, you know what I'm saying? And these are homes that are already been burnt down and everything like that. And only like $900 is being sent from the government and stuff like that. And everyone was going crazy. They were just, wow, that's wild. Like homes are being burnt down and you don't really even have enough sparity and lives are lost too. Around like, I think 115, a little bit more. It was just crazy that they just, it just shows that the government just doesn't care.
And what I've
But yeah,
heard now, Oprah is buying up a lot of land in that area that was burned down. So there you have it. All right, let me for Wednesday. Um, I'm going to ask that you move down to week 7 and read Malcolm X at the University of Ghana. That will be our discussion for Wednesday's reading. So again, you'll see in week 6, it will be information about a midterm. We'll skip past that. We'll read the Malcolm X reading, and that will be discussed for Wednesday. Does anyone have any questions about what we're reading for Wednesday? Malcolm X, University of Ghana. Any other questions, comments,